coming to you from my garage. It's a new background. I actually created a new little studio space with a drafting table and some better lighting to work out here in the garage so that Meadow could actually play as I do some work. So that's why I have a different background. What I'm gonna do is intro our hand lesson. Follow along, take the interactive notes, and then you're going to apply the knowledge to your actual hand drawing. You have sketches that are due on Friday. Those sketches are your actual final composition, which are going to be done in your sketchbook or any paper that you have at home with outlines. The sketches will be shaded with graphite, and then you'll apply a Zentangle background, just like in the example that I provided for you guys. So let's get started. All right, guys, so you are going to be creating your hand notes today. I just like to do this as a little warm-up technique into the hand so you can see the basics of how everything is connected. So the first thing that you do is you trace your hand. You put your palm down, you take your pencil, you hold your pencil straight up and down. You don't angle your pencil, that's important. And then you just carefully trace everything, including the wrist. And then once that's done, you're going to make some visual connections so that you can see how you can create visual reference points to make it easier when you're drawing from observation. Now, you're not tracing your hand for the project. This is just a technique I use so that you can simplify everything and you can see how things are connected. So for example, when I do this arch line, you can see how the fingertips are connected not on a single straight line, but on a continuous curve. So this is where they're connecting. And then from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark how the knuckles and the bends in the fingers are connected as well. So I'm going to put my hand back down. I'm going to mark where my bends and knuckles are on my fingers and on the thumb. And those little tick marks are actual visual references as well. And I'm going to draw a line to connect them so you can see how the line is also a curved line, not a straight line. And the second arching connection of your main knuckles on your fingers. All right, and then what I want you to be aware of is the segments that I've now created through these arching connections are actually segments of cylinders. So if you think of your fingers not as a continuous line that's hooked together, but as cylinders on top of cylinders, it gives you more of a visual three-dimensional feel. So imagine they're all cylinders, so when you're drawing them, you're drawing more in terms of three-dimensionality rather than flat feeling fingers. So even just me going in and curving a little bit of those lines gives it a three-dimensional feel. Now these notes are for your own personal knowledge. I'm not collecting them, but it is smart to go through this video, kind of see those visual connections, because it does make it easier when I do the enlargement video of your actual hand drawing. Now there's the knuckles on your hand itself, also connected by an arch. And then the area in between your fingers is a webbed area. So if you take a minute and look at your fingers spread apart, it's not just a point or a straight line. They're curved and the skin kind of gets thin there. It's webbed. It's a webbing area that connects your fingers together. And you want to keep that visual reference in mind so when you go to draw, that you're not drawing these points that connect our fingers together, but actual this like looping thin curve. there's a connection on the knuckles and where the nail meets on the thumb. And then I want to go over just quickly with you the way that the nail sits in the finger itself. So the nail's not on top of your finger, it's technically embedded under the skin in the back end. So you want to make sure you give that look, and you do that by, and you can see it here, I'm doing this little bump that comes next to the sides of the nail, and it gives the illusion that the nail is coming from within the skin. Same thing with the thumb. That little bump right there gives the illusion that the nail is coming. Okay, so just again, that's where the thumb is coming from. The nail is kind of embedded into the skin. Just another quick example. And you're also going to notice tapering. So like the nail gets skinnier towards the finger, and as it gets away from the finger, it gets a little bit wider. So just keep all those visual details in mind as you're making these connections when you actually go to draw your hand from observation. And those are your notes for today. Moving on to actually drawing your non-dominant hand from life. So if you notice, I'm pointing out some connection points. All those reference points we just did in our note taking, you want to keep those in your brain as you're drawing. They're very important so that when you are drawing, you don't get lost. And if you do, you can make those connection points and make those connections mentally, and it will help you figure out where to draw everything. So I started with my wrist into my thumb. And this is a sketch, so it's going to be loose, it's getting down the proportions, it's getting down the size. This is an 8x10 sketchbook. And remember, if you start drawing and you realize you draw bigger than the page, it's better to draw off of the page than to force anything on, because then it will distort the proportions. So I'm making those little reference checks. So right now I drew my thumb. My thumb is now my original object that I'm going to have to reference everything off of in terms of size. So things are going to be proportionally accurate to the thumb, because that's the first thing that I drew. And then I just go back into the palm. I'm making those visual line connections. As you can see, I'm pointing it out with my pencil, and I'm just going to continue that technique all the way through, thinking about cylinders as I move on to my fingers, thinking about angles and shapes and those curved connections as I drop down into the palm area, because I want to get the width of everything kind of happening. And I'm just working my way through into the wrist. And I'm just going to continue like this until I have the basic form down, where then I can go back in and I can refine and do details before I shade. So just watch and look at those visual connections that I'm making. Notice my light sketching, my web connections that I'm making. I'm constantly making those visual checks with my pencil. So when you see my pencil go back to my fingers, I'm just pointing out to you those visual checks I'm making mentally and how it's helping me out with my drawing. And also I want you to recognize the tips of your fingers. Think of them as stretched out spheres. And if you draw those, it really helps create the form of your hand.